Hi, this is Matthias with my 2002 Jetta TDi. So it is an ALH engine. You might have a VW. This is an ALH. Very good car. It's got 426,000 kilometers on it. But I've had a problem with it for quite a while, which is limp mode. And most of you probably know about this, so I've come to this video to try to address that. I've done quite a bit of work on this recently. Replaced the turbo actuator, which tends to get corroded pretty quickly, and you will be able to take a look at it and do a visual inspection and determine whether it's operating properly. The vanes on the turbo, because it is a variable geometry turbo that you have, can also be stuck, right, because of the soot accumulating in the turbo, so that's also a common issue. You could have a leak on your vacuum system, that's another problem. And you could have problems with the N75 valve, right, or your vacuum pump. So a number of things can happen. On this car, I've done a number of things that I will go into details and explain to you how I managed to troubleshoot this limp mode issue. And hopefully it's going to give you some hints to try to address the problem if you are yourself running into it. We're going to go through a little bit of how the system works so that you get a better sense of why things are happening and what even the limp mode really is, because it could be caused by multiple things. Could be overboost, could be underboost. In my case, it was an overboost error code I was getting, and I was trying to really understand why that was, and it really got me to do some research and get a better sense of how the system works. I want to relay this information to you. So let's get into details. So let's look at how the turbo works. All right, so let's take a look at this engine. The reason why I want to go over this is so that you understand some of the key components that you will have to check in case you run into a similar issue as I did. So what you're looking at is, again, an ALH engine, so it's a little bit different from the VW, and it's also EGR deleted. So normally you will find the EGR right here instead of this shiny pipe here. You'll find your EGR, you'll find your anti-shutter valve as well. In fact, I have them here and I want to show you what that looks like. This is your AGR assembly, and as you can tell, it was actually pretty dirty, but it was otherwise functioning properly. And you'll find your anti-shutter valve right here. This is actually connected to your vacuum system, so when the engine shuts off, it actually shuts off the air intake. As you can tell, there's a little clap, a flap that comes down, and that actually cuts off the air supply, which allows for the engine to kind of turn off cleanly. It's not as clean right now. When it turns off, it kind of humps a little bit, but I'm getting actually much better performance, and the engine is working a lot better since I removed the EGR. So that's something that I have no regret doing. But I will clean it up and get a better sense of how it should look like when it's clean. But I thought I would mention that. So this is your EGR assembly. Now, this also has another pipe here that actually connects to the air intake, and this also goes away. You have to put a plate on the actual connection to block that off. You will also find a couple of valves. So when you actually do an EGR delete, you can remove a number of things, and it's not causing that many problems. This is your anti-shutter valve. Solenoid, right, which was working fine in my case, but bracket was actually broken, so it was kind of loose and dangling in the engine, which really isn't great. So I took it out, and you have the actual EGR valve itself, right, which is your solenoid that controls the EGR. The EGR, again, is the exhaust gas recycling system, so it allows for the some of the exhaust gases to be coming out of the turbo to be recycled into the engine, which actually lowers the amount of oxygen, and it's acting actually as a pollution regulation mechanism. You can find a lot more information on the internet about this, so feel free to do some research. But all this gear is, all this stuff is what I removed, and the engine is working fine. Now, it is throwing a code because it's looking for the EGR valve and it's not finding it. So there are some software updates that you can run in order to prevent the code from showing up, because you will get the check engine light on your dashboard because of that. And that's something that you want to know about before you get into that kind of modification. So what we did here is simplifying the vacuum line system So we have some key components here. Your vacuum tank, you have the line that goes actually to your N75 valve, and that's the actual actuator valve for the turbo. We're going to talk about this extensively because the purpose of this video is actually to test that valve and see whether it's working properly. This valve is actually connected to the vacuum line. The other side is connected to the breather on the air box, and the vacuum pump is right here, which connects in the back. You cannot quite tell here, but connects to your brake boost system. And that line here that runs in the back goes to your turbo actuator. So it's really important to understand how that works, because testing the system will allow you to determine whether the actuator is doing its job. And the purpose of the actuator is to reroute some of the exhaust gases in the turbo back to the exhaust system, so that you're not running into a pressure that will be too high in your air intake, and that will actually throw in an overboost, right? So the computer is monitoring this on a constant basis, and you should be falling between a certain range of pressure in the air intake. And if you have issues with your valve because it's not regulating the pressure correctly, then you can run into overboost issue, which was actually the problem I had. So I want to show you actually how the actuator works. And to do this, we're going to use a vacuum pump. So just stay put, and we're going to take a look at this right away. All right, so let's take a look at the actuator. And to do this, we're going to use this fairly inexpensive vacuum pump, because we want to simulate the vacuum into the system and make sure that the actuator is actually responding the way it should. So to do this, it's very easy. We're going to follow the line that goes to the actuator, so it runs in the back here. I replaced all the tubing actually on my vacuum system because the ends were frayed and the rubber tends to get loose, right, where the connections are. So it's not a bad practice to actually replace that, especially on a car that's nearly 20 years old now. Not a bad idea to replace your hoses as a regular maintenance, because you could get into vacuum leaks, and that could lead to that kind of problem too. So I'm gonna unplug this from the N75. So I'm gonna use both of my hands here. And unplug it from there. It's a little bit easier normally. There we go. So you saw some smoke, actually some dust flying off of it, because it's a bit of an old system. And I've got this hose here that's connected to my vacuum pump right here. I'm going to connect this over to the hose that runs to the actuator, and we will be able to determine whether the actuator is working the way it should. So in order to do this, I want to show you what's going on. It's going to be very difficult for me to do both at the same time, but I'm going to take the phone off of there in just a moment and show you what that looks like. Right? I need to change the position of the phone though. Hang on. So, phase 2 of the testing of the actuator. Your actuator is all the way back there, and I'm going to turn on the light here so that we can see what we're doing. So it's in the back, behind the air intake. You can see it pretty nicely here. That's probably going to be the best angle I can get right now. There we are. Yeah, I'm going to wait for this to focus. And I'm going to start pumping my vacuum pump. So what should we see? We should see the arm moving, and the vanes, see the little piece that's on the right here is actually connected to the turbo, and it actionates the vanes, so the gas rerouting system, if you will, of the turbo inside the turbo in order to prevent an overboost. So right now we're pumped, meaning that when the system is offline right now, if I actually simulate what I just did right now, which is actually removing any kind of vacuum from the system, that's the nominal position. That's the resting position of the turbo. Now, if I actually pump back again, then you will see that as I'm pumping, and my hose actually came loose here, so just bear with me. Just reconnecting, thank you. I'm gonna pump again just to show you the behavior. As the vacuum increases, which is how it should be when the engine is on, then the vanes are actually closed, right? And what we should see is that as we're revving up the engine, then the valve will adjust the vacuum and will lower the amount of vacuum in the circuit, and will actually start diverting the exhaust gases back to the exhaust system to prevent an overboost. So that's with the pump. The good thing is that with this test, you can actually determine whether the vanes on the turbo are working properly. The easiest way to do it is to disconnect the rod coming from the actuator from the little arm actually that's on the turbo, and this should be very loose. It should be very easy to handle. You should be able to do it by hand, and that will allow you to determine whether the turbo is actually working properly. Because what can be happening, especially with high mileage engines, is that the vanes get caught, right? They get stuck because of soot, and they just residues of the exhaust gases running through the turbo, and it's not working properly. So that's a good test to do. The second test is to ensure that the actuator is working fine, which means that the arm, the rod that extends from the actuator, is going out and in as you actually apply vacuum to it, and that's the reason why you need a little vacuum pump. I'm going to do this one more time so that you can really see what's going on. And that is a very important test to do, right? Because that ensures that the system is working the way it should. In this case, the actuator is new. I confirmed that the vanes on the turbo are also loose and they're working properly. So we're gonna plug the system back in, we can start the engine, and we should see the actuator move as we start the engine. So just stay put and let's take a look at this. All right, so I've connected the actuator back to the vacuum system, to the N75 valves, you can tell here. And what we should see when we start the engine is the vanes actually, so the actuator doing what it's supposed to do. So we should see the rod actually moving down. So my son is at the wheel right now, is going to start the engine momentarily. Let me just drop my camera down there so that we can take a look. Just try not to get burned in the process. And let's see whether we actually see this working the way it should. So we should see the actuator going down, maybe pretty quick, but we should be able to confirm that. Start the engine, make sure you don't have a gear in shift, right? Make sure you're in neutral and start the engine. So let's go. So what did we see here? We saw, so right now, obviously there's still vacuum in the system, so the system is still under negative pressure. What I will do just to show you is actually unplug the actuator from the N75, which actually releases basically there's no vacuum anymore in the system here. But as you turn off the engine, the vacuum pump stops. So your actuator should go back to its normal position because it's a membrane that's in that thing anyways. So it will actually restore the initial position of the vanes. And this is what we saw here when we started the engine. It did pull on the rod pulled on the little lever on the turbo, and that acted up correctly. So everything here is working as it should. The only thing that we don't know is whether the N75 valve is actually working as it's supposed to. And we're going to take a look at this now and see how what kind of results we're getting. All right, next phase in the test. So what do we have this time? Still a vacuum pump here. It's connected this time to the output of the N75 valve. In other words, this is a valve that controls again our actuator, our turbo actuator. What we want to see is actually how this is operating and whether it's operating the way it should. So I will put this on the dash and we're going to start the engine and we're going to see what kind of vacuum we get. Right? So make sure it's connected securely. It's good here. I'll put it there. We're not going to pump the actual pump itself. We're going to start the engine and see what happens. Right? So let's get in the car. So we're going to vacuum pump here, and we're going to see what's happening as we start the car. When you start the car, you should see vacuum coming in, right? And that's normally what we'll see. There we go. The vacuum is building up, which is perfect. That's how it should. Because we tested that earlier, and we know this is the expected behavior. Now, what we should see now is as we accelerate, as we rev up the engine, we should see a decrease of vacuum, which triggers a retraction of the rod on the actuator, and which actually allows for the vanes to let the additional air or the overpressure exiting through the exhaust system, right? And that protects the overall intake system from overboost, right? So if you do get an overboost, that means that you have too much pressure in the circuit. That means that something is not regulating the pressure correctly, and that could be your N75, that could be the vanes, that could be the actuator, all these different components that I covered earlier. So I'm gonna rev up the engine and see what happens. So as you can see, the vacuum is decreasing, and it's decreasing regularly as I rev up the engine, which is expected, right? But you can also see that I'm not really going back to 20 here. I'm actually going a little bit over here, which means that the valve doesn't seem to be working really the way it should. But I'm going to do that one more time. I'm at about 2,000 RPM right now. I'm going to increase the RPMs to almost 3,000. And now I'm accelerating even more, and you see the valve is actually not working properly. So that is where I think we have a problem with this valve, and we were at actually 20 millimeter of mercury of vacuum. We're not going right back. We're actually lower now at about 17 and a half, or about 17 and a half roughly. So something has been telling me for a while, and I've been struggling with this problem for a long time now, that it was a combination of things. A vacuum system probably had some leaks. The actuator was completely rotted out, and I'll post some pictures of that. It was actually it was basically completely destroyed by rust. And I think my N75 is also not working properly. I'm gonna do this one more time. So 2,000, you see the vacuum is decreasing, and it's decreasing again, but it should decrease further, and it's not. So it could be because the system is actually already rerouting the exhaust gases. I did some additional tests earlier on that same vane, and it was jumping all over the place. The N75 valve was clearly not working the way it was supposed to. So we're gonna go ahead and replace that valve and test it again and see what happens. Stay put. So, got vacuum, and my understanding is that when I'm accelerating, I should see the vacuum kind of changing, right? So it's increasing vacuum, which means that it's pulling on the rod, which is diverting the exhaust gases out of the turbo and preventing an overboost. And I've been having this error code, right, 220 I believe, for overboost for quite a while. You can see it's also burning oil, that's the smoke you can see. So as I accelerate, theoretically I should see, as we see here, the vacuum increasing, and it's not quite happening here. It seems to be kind of very uneven and not really responding the way it should. The car is smoking quite a bit right now. I think I'm having other issues with this car. So occasionally it does actually work, but my understanding was that as I'm revving up the engine, I should see the pressure drop, right? And it doesn't seem to be happening. So maybe I'm not reading this right. In fact, the pressure is dropping, so that would indicate that the valve is actually working to some extent, but I don't think it's dropping enough, really. It should really be dropping to 0, probably. So it kind of makes me wonder whether this N75 valve is actually working properly. Alright, so let's proceed with the replacement of the N75 valve. It's very easy to do. You have two nuts that are right here and right there. You ideally want to disconnect your hoses. There's a little tool here that I'm using that really works well. If it focuses, yep, there we go. And that actually allows you to actually loosen up the, it's not focusing, there you go. Loosening up the hoses that are going to the different connectors. And it really prevents damage from happening, because the last thing that you want is to break the little nipples that the hoses are connected to. So ideally you would run that tool in between the hose and the nipple, go all around, and then it should be fairly easy to remove. Right? And spin it a little bit. I did actually just replace this hose recently, so there you go. I have some extra length here, and I'll explain you why this is important. And I got this hose here. This one I'm going to leave on because I'm going to replace it anyway, so it doesn't really matter. And this is your breather that goes to the air box. Same thing. I'm going to just run around the hose with that little tool. You can use a little bit of lubricant if you have some. I know some people actually recommend that because they do tend to stick to the plastic. There we go. It's unplugged, so this goes to my breather. And you have a connector at the bottom that you also have to remove. I believe there's a latch for that one. We're gonna take it out actually once the connector is out, because it's once the vein is out. So 10 mil socket, easy to do really. You shouldn't get too many issues. It's very easy to access. So it's one of the things that really doesn't take that long to replace. This is also sitting on two little pieces of rubber to prevent it from vibrating too much, but you don't really need to remove that. I'm using an extension right now. I can probably take it out because it's not needed. For the other side, and there we go. That's literally an operation that will take you maybe 15 to 20 minutes. Make sure you're not actually dropping the nuts, because the nut can actually drop all the way down to your skid plate. The skid plate is off on my car, so I don't really care. I would be able to retrieve it pretty easily. And now the vein is out, which really will give you much better access to the connector that's underneath. And for this, you need a flat screwdriver for those ones. Yes, which I might not have handy. So let me see if I can. And it's not coming out, so in order to make sure I'm not breaking it, I'm gonna get a flat screwdriver just now. Hang in there. Oh, you fell. So, flat screwdriver. You might be used to these connectors. You press down and you should be able to take it out. I haven't really taken this one out in quite a while, so it's a little hard to remove. And it's not coming out easy, in fact. There we go. It locked itself back in. This is like a little locking mechanism. Looks like it's loose. Well, it's taking a lot longer than expected. that won't come out. So connector seems to be kind of jammed in there. Oh, there we are. Whew. Okay, well, kind of picked up a fight with me. So there's a little tab right there. Can't quite see it, but it's on the underneath, and you have to press down in order. You have to actually, it's kind of spring mounted, right? So you have to use a flat screwdriver, pull on it. Make sure you don't pull on the connector at the time you're doing this, because otherwise it's just going to resist further. So it's going to be even harder to take out, right? So this is what we're going after, right? So this is our valve. We will replace this piece. I have another one ready. Now the one that I bought is a little bit different. It's actually for a BEW engine. So you'll see the difference between the two. It's very easy to see. This was actually a very inexpensive piece. It was about $40 on Amazon. And you have the difference between the two. Well, I'll actually zoom out a little bit. This is the new one. And this is the old one. So obviously you can see there's an obvious difference between the two, is that the head is actually pointing in the opposite direction. As far as we're concerned, it's not an issue, and the reason is that I actually have factored in extra hose in my system. So I've got the hose here that is going to come. It's going to come to the circuit at the top there. So I got some extra line, and this is because I replaced the hoses, right? So I had some extra length. This is not going to be impacted because it's on the same side. And for the hose that actually goes to the turbo actuator, I've got a bit of a longer one here that I cut specifically for this. This one is going to help me get to and kind of loop around from one side to the other. The reason why I actually bought this one is because it was readily available and I could get it within a few days. So it was much quicker for me to actually go down this path. Not ideal, but you know what? This was just a personal decision. You don't have to do this. So plug it back in. The bracket is kind of loose now in the back, right? So you have to perhaps even hold it in place. What you can also do is put one nut on one side, and you see that you have notches actually on both sides of the actuator valve. So you can just slide it in on one side, and that actually helps you hold it into position, which makes the mounting a lot easier. And again, the one thing that you do not want is to drop those nuts into the engine bay, because that will turn a 15-minute job into like a half an hour, possibly more, especially if you don't have a lift and you need to crawl under the car. Not a good position to be in. So I'm going to secure this. Very easy. You don't have to apply too much torque. It's there's not, just to hold it into position really on the bracket. Okay, that's one side. And do the other side. And that's what happens, as I was explaining earlier. When you drop it, it's under there. Nope. It'll take me a moment to grab it because again the skid plate is off. It's actually further than I thought, so I'm going to tighten this nut a little bit later. That's okay. So what do we have here? We have our breather. Breather goes back. Easy breezy, right? Pun intended. I have this hose here that goes here. There we go. It's sort of pretty nicely, and it's long enough to go around and plug into the actuator line. I'm going to secure it back on the bracket. I got this hose here that goes to the one-way valve, check valve, and goes to the vacuum tank, and that goes at the top. And that's it, right? It's as simple as that. So the one thing that I will do is disconnect it from here again, right? And try and test it one more time, so that we can ensure that this valve is actually working the way it should. So I should not have plugged the vacuum right away. So it's out now. We gotta plug it to the vacuum pump to get a reading and see how it's behaving this time. All right, so I retrieved my tool. Be able to secure that nut. Do this right away because otherwise I will forget. And what I did in the meantime is connecting my vacuum pump again back to the circuit. So what do we have? We have the pump, right, as I did earlier. The pump actually goes to the nipple that controls the turbo actuator from the valve that we just replaced, right? So we're gonna do the exact same test with this here for reading. I grab my camera and we're gonna start this engine one more time and see what happens. A bit of a glare here. Oh, a bit better. Okay, here we are. So we're getting a reading now, which surprisingly is much lower than the previous one. Now that is interesting. Okay. So we got a very low reading on this vane, and that's quite odd actually. I should get something much closer to the vacuum that I have on the engine, and that doesn't seem to be the case. So that is a little bit surprising here. As I accelerate, I'm getting even lower pressure. This makes me think that there's probably something wrong here, like that we shouldn't get that kind of reading when we're idling. We reconnected everything, so something is not right. So we're gonna take a look at this and see what's going on. All right, so I looked on my system here. Nothing really is jumping at me right now. So I'm a vacuum pump connected to the vac out that goes to the actuator, and I know this is the right connection, so no issue there. I don't have any vacuum leak. This is going to the air box for the lower hose that we can see right in the corner there, and this is going to the bottom connection here. The top connection goes to the vacuum system, so no problem here either. This is a little bit surprising. Makes me think that this vane might actually be defective, and that's a possibility. So we're gonna try that one more time, but considering it's not working right away, it really does make me think that could be something else going on there. So let's try that one more time, and we're gonna do one more test after that, see what happens. Oh, okay. It's funny because it increases and then it decreases. So the vacuum goes to where it's supposed to be, which is about, 20 millimeter of mercury of a vacuum, and then it comes back down. And then obviously at that point the actuator cannot operate properly because, it's obviously, you can see that it's reducing, but I can also see that the engine, or feel that the engine is not working the way it should, and I don't believe this is the way it's supposed to. In fact, you can see the vacuum is actually decreasing now. So there's very little vacuum, which means that the actuator is not running fully. Like it's not going to be able to run in its fully functional range, and that is not good either. So what I want to do here is see, actually, that's one thing we didn't do earlier, is determine actually what is the range of motion of the actuator, and see how it actually operates. But from the test that I've done earlier, it should be actually working within the range of the values that we actually used earlier. Very easy to do. Just gonna disconnect the hose from there, connect my pump back here, and look at actually what is the range that I should be getting based on the motion of the actuator. So let me share that with you. It's gonna be a little weird here because I'm gonna change the orientation of the screen, but this is really to try to explain to you what should be happening here. So I got my vacuum pump. I'm gonna look at the range that we're getting, range of motion of the actuator. It's a little blurry right now. Oh, there we go. So let me pump here and see what we get. So I'm at 5 right now. The actuator rod is still moving. Now I'm at max range almost. No, it's still moving. So I'm at max range right now on the actuator, and now I'm minus 17 roughly. I'm actually minus 17 millimeter of mercury, which is kind of the nominal vacuum that we get on the vacuum circuit. And this is kind of the next step that I want to do. I'm gonna release the vacuum here. The actuator is still operating normally. The one thing that I want to show you is the kind of vacuum that you should be getting when the engine is running. So this is also a good test to do because that allows you to ensure that your vacuum pump is doing what it's supposed to do. In order to do this, we have to use a different hose. I'm going to try to use that one here, which comes straight from the vacuum pump circuit, and that's assuming I can actually remove that hose now. It's coming out. Okay, so I have my hose here. I have a little nipple I can use. In fact, I'm gonna use this one here if I can take it out. It's too stiff. So, and I'm gonna grab my hose. I'm not sure whether I'll be able to fit that in actually. Oh yeah, fits. Okay. It's not the right nipple for sure, but actually, hopefully it's gonna hold up for a moment. There we go. So now we're gonna start the engine and get the reading again of what the pump, what the vacuum pump is actually generating in terms of vacuum, right? Kind of the next step. So I've got a pump again, starting the engine, and there you go. So see, we're actually we're almost maxed out now on our vacuum pump, which is a good thing because that actually indicates that the pump is working the way it should. Now it's not a good thing because obviously we seem to be having a problem with a new valve, and I'm pretty certain the specs on that valve are the same on the BEH or BW as it is on the ALH engine code. So it seems to indicate that the valve is actually not working properly, which is really bad news. So we're gonna have to put the old one back. So I'm gonna do this, and I'll probably make another video once I get the replacement valve and see how that's going. Thanks for your time. I hope it's helping troubleshooting your vacuum related problems or overboost issues. Incidentally, since I started testing all of this, the old valve actually seems to be working a lot better, which is really strange. Another thing that's good to do here is that when I shut off the engine, the vacuum remains, which means that your circuit is airtight. If you will have any kind of vacuum leak going on, then the vacuum will slowly decrease to 0. Here it's holding vacuum, which is a really good sign. Considering I replaced all the hoses and everything, I'm actually not really surprised, but that's also a good thing to test on your engine. So hopefully this is going to help. I will report back once I get the replacement valve, which I'm going to have to order a new one at this point and put the old one back for now. And yeah, I'll make another quick video to continue my testing with the new valve. Hopefully the new one is going to work properly. Thanks. Bye for now.